You weren't anything special, just a dad clinging to old war stories. That's what the young orderly scoffed as he pulled the curtains closed around room 204, not realizing who he was talking about. Daniel Holt didn't argue. He never did. He just lay there quietly in his bed at St. Agnes Veterans Hospice, his breath growing shallower, his hand resting gently on a faded photo of a girl in fatigues. Above him, a dusty shadow box sat bolted to the wall, untouched for years, sealed since 1972. No one asked what was inside. No one cared. Not until the day Daniel didn't wake up. That afternoon, as the nurses cleared out his room, someone finally opened it. Inside were medals most staff had never even seen, a Distinguished Service Cross, a Purple Heart, and one worn patch from a recon unit long since decommissioned. But what stopped them wasn't the medals. It was the letter. A single page, yellowed with time, signed in bold by a former Secretary of Defense. It read, "To the father of a soldier this nation could never repay. We owe our courage to yours." And that's when people started asking who Rachel Holt was. Studio microphone: if you believe courage isn't inherited, it's earned, in silence and sacrifice, then like and subscribe. This story isn't about headlines. It's about legacy. Daniel Holt had always known his daughter wasn't like the others. Not just strong, but relentless, calculated, watchful. From the time she was 8, she'd shadowed him through his recovery, his limp a constant reminder of a recon mission gone wrong in the valley of Kandahar. But Rachel never saw weakness. She saw discipline. She asked to tie his boots in the morning, not because he needed help, but because she wanted to learn the routine. She'd wake early, run beside him, measure her breath with his. The neighborhood kids called it overkill. Who trains a little girl like she's a ranger? But Holt wasn't training her. He was passing on a language only soldiers understood, one of stillness, decision, and responsibility. The same people who whispered behind their backs became the ones who smirked when Rachel enlisted. They called it riding daddy's coattails. Even her COs were skeptical when she entered recon evaluation. "You don't look like the type," one of them chuckled during orientation. Rachel didn't blink. She just said, "You'll change your mind before the briefing ends." And by the end of that first month, no one laughed when she walked in. Still, doubt stalked her like a shadow. Back in the States, Daniel had become a ghost in his own town. The bar where he once told stories now turned down the volume when he walked in. The VFW, once a place of brotherhood, had turned into a gallery of skeptics. They didn't question him. They questioned what he raised. Holt was solid, they'd whisper. But his daughter? She's just trying to prove something. Daniel didn't need to argue. The truth was coming. Halfway across the globe, under a red sky bleeding over the Helmand Desert, Captain Rachel Holt stood in the dust, scanning the terrain where their convoy had been ambushed. They were low on supplies, short one medic, and the communications had been fried by a local jammer. Their platoon leader was unconscious, 2 soldiers pinned behind a Fliptamaripi, and the fallback point was a mile away, through exposed terrain. A lesser officer would have called for emergency evac. Rachel didn't. She mapped the terrain in seconds, remembered something her father once said after a patrol turned lethal: "You don't go around chaos. You go through it, with your team behind you, or not at all." She made a call. A flanking maneuver across the ravine, using collapsed terrain and moonlight to their advantage. No textbook plan. No backup. Just faith in training and instinct. She led from the front. Quiet. Focused. She dragged the medic to safety herself. Reached the pinned soldiers. Laid down suppressing fire. Then directed the retreat with a makeshift drone hacked through her wrist unit. And 19 minutes later, every single one of her soldiers was accounted for, including the intel officer she wasn't ordered to recover, but did anyway. The after-action report would circulate in silence, but the Pentagon knew who Captain Holt was that day. She didn't write home about it. Didn't post it online. She just mailed her father a patch from the unit, nothing else. And now that patch sat in the shadow box, next to the medal Daniel never spoke about, next to the citation Rachel had never seen, signed decades ago in Kabul, for a mission no one ever declassified. The same blood. The same burden. But back in the VFW bar, the same veterans who had dismissed her name now sat in a stunned hush, watching the television. CNN cut live to a Pentagon briefing. "We honor Captain Rachel Holt today for extraordinary valor beyond the call of duty." The camera cut briefly to her photo, silent, composed, saluting. One of the men muttered, "That's Holt's girl." Daniel wasn't there to see it. But his silence now said more than their doubts ever could. The night was thick with silence, the kind that came before gunfire or just after the last prayer. Somewhere deep in enemy terrain, Captain Rachel Holt crouched behind a splintered mud wall, her boots sinking slightly in the sand as her eyes scanned the broken horizon. Her unit had lost radio contact hours ago. The recon was meant to be standard. Chart movement routes, confirm outpost locations, be back by sundown. Instead, they walked straight into a dead zone, one that hadn't seen American boots in over 4 years. What made it worse was the silence. No birds, no wind, just the occasional flicker of shadows across the distant ridge, moving too smoothly to be goats, too erratic to be wind. When the call came through the last flickering channel, possible hostiles closing from the east, civilian intel compromised, orders, hold or retreat. Rachel looked at the terrain, then back at her soldiers. They were young, sweating behind their helmets, breathing faster than they should have been. She didn't raise her voice, didn't pace. She crouched, drew a line in the dirt with her knife, and said, "Retreat, we lose too. Hold, we risk everyone. Advance, we change the map." No one spoke. They just nodded. Because by then, they learned something. Captain Holt didn't gamble. She calculated. She trusted silence over noise, instinct over protocol. They moved in pairs, cutting across ravines by moonlight, covering one another with the precision of a team that trusted their leader more than their radios. Rachel was always the first over a wall, the last to cross a trench. She carried extra weight in her rucksack, ammo, rations, water, because she'd rather slow herself down than lose someone behind her. At one point, a young private tripped over rebar and screamed out, panic in his eyes. Rachel didn't scold. She pulled him up and whispered the same thing her father had once whispered to her the night before his final mission. Breathe, then take the next step. At 0300 hours, with fog curling like smoke across the valley floor, they reached what remained of a stone village, burned out from years of fighting. The intel officer, a contractor with just 12 weeks of tactical prep, was bleeding, his comms unit in pieces. The squad medic had stabilized him, but the road out was compromised. They were surrounded. That's when Rachel climbed to the bell tower of a ruined mosque, laid flat, and surveyed the region with a broken thermal scope. She saw it, the path. Not a trail, not on any satellite image. It was instinct, patterns in the terrain, how the dust moved, where water once pooled. She marked it in chalk, dropped down, and said 5 words. "We're leaving in 10 minutes." They moved like shadows. 2 carried the intel officer. Rachel led the front, hand on her sidearm, rifle slung and silent. Then it happened. A flash. A crack. Then another. They were spotted. Bullets tore through the dark, and the entire unit dove behind rubble. One soldier was hit in the shoulder. Rachel pulled him back herself, blood soaking into her sleeves. The others waited for orders. She didn't scream, didn't blink. She radioed one phrase through a short-range transmitter, coded and quiet, linebreaker protocol. Execute on mark. It was a maneuver used in only the most extreme recon extractions. 2 would draw fire. The rest would pivot, flank, and force their way out with minimal fire. Dangerous. Risky. But Rachel had trained them for this. She took one of the decoy positions herself, fired a flare sideways, drew fire, moved, flanked again. 2 insurgents down. Then another. Not a single wasted bullet. Not a single hesitation. Her breath was calm, controlled. When the last of the squad cleared the kill box, she moved last, backward, her eyes always scanning. By 0440 hours, every soldier was safe behind Allied lines. The intel was recovered. 2 civilians in danger had been pulled out along the way. 0 fatalities. For injuries. 3 confirmed hostiles neutralized. Command didn't know what to say. No formal operation had been authorized. No backup dispatched. What Rachel Holt had done was technically unsanctioned. But quietly, behind the scenes, generals whispered her name. A 4-star even said, "That's the kind of mind you don't train, you inherit it." Back home, none of this hit the news. No front page. No viral video. Just a manila folder added to a stack of classified mission logs, sealed tight, with the note, "Leadership commendation pending review." Meanwhile, at the VFW bar where Daniel Holt's legacy had been reduced to trivia, a new conversation started. The bartender flipped to a military news segment and froze. A photo filled the screen. Captain Rachel Holt in combat gear, arm in a sling, standing with her unit behind her. The voiceover was clipped and respectful. While details remain classified, the Department of Defense has confirmed a successful field maneuver led by one of its most decorated young officers. One of the old veterans, the same one who once joked about quotas, set down his glass and mumbled, "Holt's girl just ran circles around anything I ever did." The others nodded slowly, unsure what to say. The weight of silence returned, but this time, not from dismissal, from respect. Miles away, in the quiet of Daniel Holt's room, now converted for another patient, the shadow box remained sealed no longer. A new frame had been added, a single patch with Rachel's unit designation, and next to it, a folded flag she hadn't yet claimed. The plane touched down in silence, its wheels hissing softly across the tarmac as the hatch slowly opened to let in the cold morning air. Captain Rachel Holt descended the ramp with a duffel over one shoulder and a patch stitched into her sleeve, worn but unmistakable. She looked exhausted. Not physically, but in the way people do when they've carried the weight of a team, a mission, and a legacy not measured in medals. She hadn't asked for a welcome. In fact, she'd asked for no press, no ceremony, and no red carpet. But standing at the edge of the runway, alone, was a figure in full dress blues, General Keating, commander of Joint Special Operations. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just raised his hand in salute. Rachel stopped, squared her shoulders, and returned it, crisp, unblinking, not for the cameras but for something deeper. The silence between them said it all. Then, without a word, the general handed her a folded note, the original letter from the Secretary of Defense, the one sent to her father years ago, now returned to her with one additional line handwritten in black ink. "Your father's courage lives in you. The world finally knows." News of the mission had traveled through unofficial channels faster than any classified report could stop it. Within days, stories leaked, not the operational details, but the whispers. A captain who'd saved her entire team, carried her wounded, executed textbook flanks under fire, and walked her people out without a single life lost. Soldiers began swapping the name Holt like a call sign, not because of her father, but because of her. But back home in South Dakota, those whispers sounded more like echoes when they reached the barstools of the VFW. The same men who had once chuckled over pool tables, questioned her credentials, and doubted her rank, now sat in silence, watching the screen as Rachel appeared beside the Secretary of Defense at a private medal commendation ceremony. She didn't smile. She didn't tear up. She just stood, stone still, while the citation was read aloud. For extraordinary leadership, valor beyond the call of duty, and for carrying the values of this nation forward, we award Captain Rachel Holt the Silver Star. One man dropped his drink. Another whispered, "That's Holt's girl." Damn. The old bartender, the one who'd served Daniel his last whiskey, back when the talk was still bitter, nodded once and said, "She ain't Holt's girl anymore. She's her own damn legend." And no one disagreed. At Willow Creek Veterans Hospice, Daniel Holt's room had been kept the way he left it. But someone had added something new, a display in the common hallway. Inside, his old shadow box, now open. On one side were his medals, but on the other, a photo of Rachel from the tarmac, standing beside General Keating. In between them, a simple plaque, legacy, not inherited, earned. Later that month, a young ROTC student visited the hospice to volunteer. She stood in front of the case for a long while before asking an aide, "Who's this?" The nurse smiled and said, "That's Captain Holt." She proved something people weren't ready to believe. The ROTC girl traced her fingers gently across the glass. "I want to lead like that." And somewhere, beyond medals and missions, that's where legacy really lives, not in salutes or speeches, but in the quiet transfer of courage from one generation to the next. Rachel didn't go home right away. She spent 2 weeks debriefing, then 3 more visiting the families of her unit, not because she had to, but because leadership doesn't end when the boots come off. When she finally returned to South Dakota, it wasn't with fanfare. It was at dusk. Quiet. Alone. She parked her truck outside the old VFW. It was near empty, just a few regulars and a flickering jukebox playing Merle Haggard. She stepped inside, eyes scanning the room, and the air shifted. One man stood. Then another. Then every head turned. No one said a word, until the oldest vid among them, a man with 4 tours and a bent spine, raised his glass and spoke. "Your old man? He was one of us. But you made us better." Rachel nodded. No speech. No bravado. She just walked over, picked up the cue stick off the rack, and asked, "Who's got next?" Back at the base, a letter arrived for her later that week. It was addressed in ink, scrawled in neat block letters. To the one who made them all eat their words. Inside was just one item, her father's old recon patch, now framed beside her own. No message. Just that. And somewhere beyond the headlines, far from ceremony and press briefings, that's how heroes are made, not by proving everyone wrong, but by proving something eternal right. That leadership isn't about noise. It's about who you carry when the world tries to break them, and who carried you when no one believed you could.